I'm Candi Williams. I am head of content design by day and a writer by night. My background is in psycholinguistics and social linguistics, so the impacts of language on how people think, feel, and what they do. I've written some books outside of that, and when I'm not doing all of that, you will probably find me shuffling my tarot cards, clutching my crystals, and listening to Motown. I'm also extremely clumsy, but there's not much I can fall over. But if I do, just go along with it. It was all meant to happen. And please laugh at the jokes as if they're funny. Thank you. So, I did what any self-respecting content person would do. And I thought, how do I introduce myself at a conference like this? So I asked our mate ChatGPT. And it told me that I should introduce myself by saying, so dear designers, prepare to embark on a transformative expedition where the symphony of words harmonizes with the canvas of design. Let us explore how the right word, placed with intention, can illuminate the path to innovation, cultivate deeper connections, and ignite the imagination for those who witness the remarkable fusion of language and design. So I've got some big boots to fill, and that wasn't its first take. The first take was about 700 words, so we're in a job for a day longer. But as a content person, you're probably expecting me to stand up here and talk a lot about this. Not grandmas, but commas and grammar and all of that stuff. Or our mate, our little hype guy here. We do talk about that a little bit later. Or tone of voice, right? That's all we do. Because we hear this a lot. Everyone can write, can't they? But you know, I think I can hold a tune in the shower, but I'm also aware that I'm no Beyonce. And I make really, really good meatballs, but not a patch on Gino D'Acampo, some would say. So a little reality check ahead. What we do and the words and the writing part is so important, but it's really just an aspect of what content designers do. In the same way that spending time in Figma is just an aspect of what product designers do, usability tests are just an aspect of what researchers do. So I wanted to focus a bit more on some of the breadth and depth of our work and what makes it a role far beyond just being a palatable replacement for lorem ipsum. So what are we going to talk about? So we're going to talk about why language matters beyond just the word for user experiences. We're going to talk about how to work with content designers and writers on your team. And of course, we're going to talk about what to do if you don't have any. I'm not assuming everyone has content designers that they work with. And I know we've got a mixed crowd in here, so it's all right if you're feeling a bit like this, like, whoa, what is this thing? Fair, fair. You're welcome here. And you might be thinking, this is exciting. I've been knee-deep in ChatGPT. There's people that can do this for me. Great, stick with us. And you might be thinking, I've got this covered. Fancy myself as a little bit of a Shakespeare myself. And I know we've got some content designers in the room, which we love to see it too. But what's interesting is, you know, we have more UX writers and content designers in roles than ever before. But when we talk about design, all too often we're talking about this, the layouts, the patterns, the buttons, etc. But without clear, useful content, sites like the one Laura spoke about look a lot more like this. Or a really helpful way to fill out a survey, like here. Or a really cool little dating app. Really helps you find who you're looking for, doesn't it? So what we're going to get into is content design and thinking about language as a system for meaning and how it can really enable people to make sense of their experiences. And we're going to get into why we should even care about this at all, especially in a world where things are moving so quickly and changing so fast. And as someone who's written for many, many different mediums, billboards, books, etc., one of the really important things to remember is when we're writing for digital experiences, that the way that people engage with content online is very, very different than if they're reading a book or digesting some marketing. They're typically either scanning with a very specific purpose or task in mind, or skimming just to get a gist of what's going on. And one of the things that's interesting about AI, I've worked with it for about 4 years now, is it's good at generating, but it's not so good at picking up that context of what people are trying to do and designing intentionally for it, which is why you often find things are a bit too long or the tone's not quite right. So we're going to think about things in a more systematic way, and none of this is new age kind of content design speak. The notion of linguistics has been around for the best part of centuries. But often when it comes to the work that we do as content people, people think about it as this inner circle here. So the words bit, how they're used and their relation to other words. And of course, some of our role is about that. We do scrutinise words. We do care deeply about their makeup and the decisions of the words that we use. We replace them, we localise them. But there's a whole lot more to it than just that. And when we go beyond the words themselves, we start to think about the syntax and the structure and order of our word choices. So if you look at a couple of headlines that I've got on a very hot topic right now, you can see they're very similar headlines, but they're structured in different ways. So this one, it uses passive voice, it puts emphasis on the subject, and you don't actually know who's done it until a lot further down the line. And where you put that emphasis in a sentence can make a huge difference. And this one flips the syntax completely. So the actor is at the forefront and it uses strong adjectives like underpaid and exploited that can really land and arouse different feelings in people. But you immediately know who did it and what was done because it's much more active than the last one. So two similar headlines, but very different feel from the syntax alone. And the same goes for our user experiences. You know, here we have many of the same words, but a different structure, which really impacts how things land with us and how we feel about sentences and phrases. So just like the words that we pick are a choice, the structure and how we order them is too, and it has meaning. And another one, so we see these kind of error message a lot, and there's many, many different ways that you can say it. You can play with structure, passivity. In the middle one, we can see there's a bit more ownership. You've got right now, which gives you a bit of hope. Then you've got the super old school, which doesn't tell you quite so much. This one, a bitter pill to swallow that chases me on my worst days. But you can start to see the connotations, right? And the semantics, and the meaning. And here's where it gets really interesting. And meaning really starts with comprehension and how we understand words and phrases. And that is typically based on two things. So the age in which we learn a phrase and how often we use it. So I've got a timely little throwback for you here. So some of us might remember this example, and in the referendum we were simply asked if we'd like to leave the EU or remain. So if we think about that model for comprehension, with leave we've got a word that we learn pretty early and we use it a lot, but remain, not so much. It's a stative verb. We would have learned it a lot later too. So then, you know, if we have a more aligned option, similar meaning but different words, and you can see with stay, it's a word that we use a lot more often, and we would have learned it earlier too. So it starts to show us how simple reframes can have a difference in terms of our understanding and the meaning. You're probably thinking, she loves an error message. She loves an error message. I do love an error message. I really do. And I think they are often that forgotten part of the user experience. You've done all of your lovely bits, and then it's like, oh gosh, we've got no error message. Let's just write authentication error. But that is really where you will make or break trust with customers, often at some of the really trickiest and worst parts of their experience. So they're important. And you can see this. I have a real rule of like no dead ends with error messages. So giving people options of things that they can do next can really help with quelling that frustration. And the same goes for seemingly simple UX writing choices. There's a lot of consideration that goes into getting it right and making sure it lands well with users. And buttons are always a really fascinating one for us to test and really learn what makes a real difference. Because technically, two words or phrases can say the same thing, but they can mean something really different. And then, the final part of the circle is pragmatics. So this also talks about meaning, but it talks about it in context, as influenced by things like our beliefs, our backgrounds, who we are, our identities. And some of the things that we're often thinking about as content people, which might surprise you, isn't just, is AI going to take our jobs? But we are thinking about the cultural connotations and meanings of words, how those words make people feel. And this is where our friend user researchers really, really help. Potential unintended harms and consequences of words, which we'll come on to a bit more later. And what those words mean in the context. How familiar are people with them? What are their mental models of them? So when we have things like this, two buttons that might be used interchangeably, but they've got very different pragmatics. Because asking someone if they accept something is very different than asking if they understanding. And this matters when we have these awful, lengthy scroll and click patterns, which we know no one's ever reading. But at what cost? So we can play with language as a system here to encourage that understanding and thoughtful decision-making. And you're probably thinking, yeah, but like, who cares about this stuff? It doesn't matter. It does matter. And we can see that simple language changes can have a huge difference. A travel company had two seemingly innocent form fields, but because of where they were placed in the form, and there wasn't a lot of context, people were getting really confused. Are you talking about my company, the bank's company, their address, and my address? And they were putting in their bank's address and company. And this meant they were failing at the last step of credit card verification, and they were either booking elsewhere, or they were calling customer support and getting stuck in that loop. So by making the content much clearer from this, they saw £12 million gains by people being able to complete that flow. And pragmatics goes even deeper. And it really looks at the socio-cultural context of our language. So here you can see that someone's put in their last name, and they've been told to enter a valid one with 3 characters. And the intent here might be harmless. We can see how the error message was led to the last minute. But you can also see that suggesting someone's name is only valid if it has 3 characters or more is problematic and exclusionary. And the same goes for many points on language and race and ethnicity. Like I said, language has a deeper meaning, and that meaning is not always good. Social linguistics is the study of how language shapes how we see the world. And through that lens, we can see that language that denotes light as pure and good, and dark or black as bad and unethical, is particularly harmful. The good news is, we have plenty of words. So there are almost always other non-idiomatic options that we can choose instead. And they tend to be much clearer for people. Because it's really important to remember that the intention of the words that we use doesn't equate the impact. One word could mean very little to you or I, but it could be really harmful to someone else. So that pragmatics and considering the socio-cultural context is a key part of what content designers do. And often, the content design is what's maybe not seen, or what you don't say. And I've worked on quite a lot of large accessibility projects, and it's always really surprising to me that when people talk about accessibility, they're talking about the code or the color contrast, all important points, but so much of accessibility is about the content. And that's even more important when we think about this. The UK average reading age is 9 years old, and it's been going down. So it's really important that we think about this. And you know, we have things like Spotify. And at its core, accessibility, we need to consider things like ally text, so hidden labels, focus order, and these are all superpowers of content people. We're not just thinking about how people read it, but how might people who are unable to read understand the experience? And one framework I find really helpful with accessibility still is PAW. So it starts off by asking us to question if things are perceivable. And that language is used very intentionally, so it doesn't use see or hear, but it actually considers how might someone who can't see or hear use this experience. Are we relying on visual cues? This happens all too often. Icons everywhere that people just might not understand with no labels. And what alternatives are we providing? Operable. The basics. Can people use it, and not just use it if they're scrolling through an iPhone, but how does it work with things like screen readers? Where could things like swipes or taps be limiting? How does it work on voiceover? Are we giving people crystal clear instructions and options to confirm and change their mind? And a pet peeve for many of us, are the links and buttons really clear? And that understanding point is critical. I think this is even more important when AI kind of pushes us down this road where everyone can create things, but are people engaging or understanding that content? And just because someone can perceive it, they know it's there, they can use it, are they understanding it? How do we make sure that we are designing for comprehension? I think testing this is going to be more and more important as time goes on. But things that we can always think about are we using simple, everyday language, or is jargon creeping through? Are we being clear on what we're asking people to do and why? And how well would someone that perhaps has very low literacy understand this? Where might they struggle? And then, finally, experiences need to be robust enough to work and scale across a multitude of technologies and platforms. I've done a lot of work in global tech and in many different markets, and we take for granted perhaps that we have good internet connections and smartphones. That's not the case for everyone. So we need to think about that when we are designing. And ultimately, we're designing for everyone's understanding, whatever their context. Cool story, bro, you might be thinking. But what about the business? Well, 25% of the UK population have a disability, myself included. So by not considering accessibility, that is a huge, huge chunk of your customer base who can't engage. And also, we have to bear in mind that we are in an attention economy now, from juggling TikTok and TV, to the email overwhelm that we're all getting, to the general stress of the world being on fire and cheese being nearly £7. Accessible, clear design benefits everyone. And it's increasingly important, because people can't use things they can't find. They can't buy things they can't use. And they can't decide on things that they don't understand. And as some wise folk once said, it's really not dumbing things down, it's opening it up. And many, many studies over the years I've researched have shown that whether you are a doctor or a lawyer or you're just a customer trying to get something done, clear language always wins. So yeah. So we've spoken about syntax, semantics, pragmatics, so hopefully that's helped clarify that we do a bit more than just making lorem ipsum a bit better. So how do you even work with content people? And we've all seen and lived the memes. I have aged and gained frown lines from them, so I hear ya. And we're getting better, we're in the Figma files now, slowly but surely, painfully. But I get it, right? I get how it plays out, because all too often, the design process looks a lot like this, doesn't it? So you've got this lovely, sweet, succulent design process, and then you've got content coming in right at the end there, squeezed in. And what this often ends up with is situations like this. Your designs are beautiful, they are ready to go. Oh, but actually, we forgot to tell the customer this. Oh, and it's too long in the German language. Oh, and that icon doesn't have alt text. And I think we can all agree, right, that no one likes those last-minute surprises and pivots, which is why it's really important that we're intentional about how we work with content design. And it happens because this is how the setup often looks. You've got your lovely engineers, you've got your PMs, you've got your designers, and then you've got one tired, overworked content designer running through it all. Or worse, you've got no one. You've got people that have said, here's Claude with 2 tokens, good luck, Godspeed. And I'm often asked what ideal would look like. Well, ideally, it's a world where you've got designers working together. It's a world where you see design as beyond just product design or UX design, but you see language as a key part of the design process. But I get it. That's not always the case. We don't all have the resources to make that happen. So what do we do? Well, I always advocate, as one, for a story model. So with this, some things that are really important, so making a really good start up front, because content can make or break the user experience, but it should always help shape it. So that upfront context is key. Your time to get together, to define how you want to work, what are the gnarly content and design challenges that you need to tackle together. And then that middle point, content designers can't always be in all of the sessions, but having those check-ins, sharing those updates, getting them involved in user research so we can listen. What are people saying about it? Where are they getting stuck? What language is confusing them? It's really important that you stay connected through the process rather than content just coming in at the end. And that endpoint, it matters too, because we're thinking, hey, is this really final? Have things changed? Have we factored in the alt text that we need? Have we thought about how this is going to localize? Have we missed anything? So that 90% last-minute checks are always really, really key. And coming together at these points, even if it's just to jam for an hour or two, can be so important. Random, seagull. Because I call it seagulling. Because what happens in the last minute, if you don't do that, you get these last-minute swoop and poops, which causes chaos, right? No one wants that. PMs don't want it, engineers don't want it, so making sure we are working together earlier is key. And what else can you do? So if in doubt, ask. Work with whoever is doing the words, is working on the content in your organisation to see how they would like to work. And they might have loads of competing priorities. They might be really struggling because they're just not invited to things. So ask and intentionally work through how you collaborate. Ask them what meetings they'd like to be involved in, what tools they want to work in, and how you can work best together. What do you need from them? And one of the things that I've done over time, which can be quite useful, is task mapping. So there's a lot of tasks that we will do together, but there are some things that are different, right? Some things that a content designer might lead on, other things that a product designer might lead on, and it might shrink depending on the size of the project. This is a much bigger one. But let's get clear on what tasks need to be done. This also helps alleviate that, well, it's just the words, right? Not quite. And a little shameless plug, check those meeting invites. It's a small but important one. Content designers can spend a lot of soul-destroying time chasing info from meetings they were left off of that had critical information. So share notes, invite them along, be a champion. And above all else, advocate for content where you can. Use this to share the importance of language. And one of the biggest success metrics for me over the years for content design has been more people advocating for the need for content design when we are not in the room. It has been far more successful seeing content designers work on projects and do great work than it has any deck that I could share with execs. So be an advocate. We really appreciate it. And a practical way you can do that, I mean, imagine this world. No more. Just ignore it. It's a placeholder copy. It's lorem ipsum. It's not real. But you're actually handing over to the content people to talk through their content rationale and the decisions they've made, why they've made them. And finally, I mean, what do you even do if you don't have content people on your project? I hear you. So, first of all, design systems are your friend here. We love a design system. But really thinking about your design system beyond the visual side and the connection with engineering, those things are important, but actually seeing it as a vehicle for consistent, good quality content and embedding content patterns and content guidance within your design system. And WISE do this really, really well. So you will see with WISE that throughout their design system, they've also considered content. So you can see here that with each alert type, it doesn't just tell you the visual cues, the colors, the length, it tells you how you should be writing for these depending on the user's context. And you'll see this throughout. And these are things that we can really work through. And I always advocate for content designers spending a chunk of their time working on the design system because it just makes things easier for everyone. And if you're like, I'm not really sure where to start, well, we have some really great resources out there now, not least one called the Readability Guidelines that many of us worked on when we were stuck in our homes during lockdown eating too much cheese. We also managed to pull this together with the Queen of Content Design herself, Sarah Winters. And you'll find all sorts on here, so points of grammar, clear language, designing for accessibility. It's an open source resource that I would recommend. And here they are. They're back again. So AI, I think people think I'm an AI hater. I'm not really. I've worked with it for 4 years, since before old Sam Altman, etc. So AI. So it can be your pal if it's used thoughtfully, emphasis on the thought and the critical thinking there. I have worked with a number of tools. This one is called Writer, and this is an AI tool designed for writers. What's good about it is you can put your content design guidelines in there, your tone of voice, anything you do or don't say. It can be a really good vehicle for pushing things like inclusive language. So that's a really good one. It links in with Figma, so it's really helpful when you're writing in situ. Now, you can do things like this with a custom GPT, but I would strongly, strongly recommend working on this with a content designer or a conversation designer who have excellent skill to making sure we're using the right patterns, because 4 or 5 years later, and we are still very, very clear on the underlying principle of generative AI being, I'm not going to swear, but garbage in, garbage out. So the way in which it's built is really critical. And I could do another talk on generative AI itself, but here is a snapshot of where I am landing. Gen AI as an editor, good. Can it tell you when and where to use an Oxford comma? Yes. Can it make sure you're capitalizing in the right places if you tell it to? Yeah. Does it save our time endlessly arguing about the use of an em dash? Does it like to overuse an em dash? Also, yes. Gen AI as a writer, jury's very much still out for me. A lot of work needs to go into it to get it anywhere near the quality that it needs to have. I have not seen it evolve in the way that I would expect it to in terms of the outputs that it is producing 4 years on. And often, my experience is the amount of time that you have to put into AI to get it to put out anything half decent, you could have probably written it yourself. And as a content designer, this is where it really falls down for me. So that pragmatic point of view, the semantics, the understanding of people's context, their emotional awareness, it just hasn't got it. So for me, it really helps with that level 1 work, arguing about capitalization, sure, but it has a hell of a long way to go to rival content design. Not to mention the many, many risks with it. And at the heart of it all, I remember reading this quote very, very, very early on. And in a world where trust is so important, we must remember that fundamentally, it lies. And it lies a lot, and we can call it what we will, but the accuracy point is so, so, so important, especially for brand trust. So we need to factor that in and make sure that we are allowing time to review. My biggest concern about generative AI is not as if it will take our jobs, is if it will take our critical thinking and the impact it will have. Because writing has always been an exercise of meaning, of understanding, of shaping how we see the world. And by putting all that in the hands of a robot, I do worry about the impact it has on our abilities to think and be creative, as we spoke about earlier. So, on a more positive note, stay curious. So we are in a luckier space than ever before. And I know I dress like a 90s CBC presenter, but I am older than you think. And it's really, really great to see over the years and the last decades how many more books and resources we have on content design. Honestly, some of the early ones, like Content Strategy for the Web, are just still so, so, so great. So I would strongly recommend some of these if you're interested in content design. And thinking beyond just the words, that would be my ask for all of you in here today. Now we've been through this little circle, I hope it's given you some food for thought and an opportunity to question things like meaning, structure, the context of things, how well people understand. And, of course, one thing you could do, I know times are hard out there, but You can build a business case for a content designer for your project. Don't worry, I've got some handy little tips to help you. So you could use a bit of confirmation bias and convince them it's their idea. So remember how you said that Asia was our biggest growth market? I think there's a real opportunity for localization and content strategy here. And who doesn't love efficiency when we're talking about AI? Who is great at AI? Content designers. So you could use this to convince them. Or loss aversion. Highlight how they're missing out. You could slide this tweet from the VP of Figma saying that the best addition to their design team was UX writer. Everything is better with them. So I hope that has given you some food for thought, a few things to take away. So language can make or break UX, but it should always help shape it. Lorem ipsum could never, ever, I mean it, honestly. I don't know where the pretzel's there, but I kind of like it. AI does not replace the need for good content designers. It's an interesting one, though, because what I have seen as someone who spends a lot of time just with like SAS takes on why your information architecture is important on LinkedIn, but I spend too much time on LinkedIn. For anyone, we should not be spending as much time on LinkedIn. Anyway, what I have seen is a lot of people who laid off their content designers frantically hiring for them again. So make of that what you will, but AI does not replace the need for good content designers, nor does it replace our critical thinking. Content people matter, and they make users' experiences better. So go hug or hire them. And to my content design people, I know it's hard out there. I coach content designers, and I hear it. It was hard anyway because we were running between 20 different pods, and now you've got everyone saying, do you know what would do your job well? This little robot, this Claude skill would be great. But we've got to think about how far we have come. There are content people leading the conversation, leading projects, leading teams, and you are all doing wonderful work out there. So remember, you're not garlic bread. Content design is not a side dish or an add-on. So go and take your place at the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Candi. So I reckon we've got time for maybe one or two quick questions if anyone has got, one. Stick your hand up. I'll run to you with a mic. There's just me in this room now, so I'm going to have to just bear with me while I run up the steps.
It was just, thank you, great talk. One of my friends is kind of, had a very successful career in a different field and is very interested in content design. And I was just wondering about tips for either new people going in or for someone looking to transfer into content design, what pathway you think that could look like, particularly within this environment with the vulnerability of AI.
Oh my, I forgot I had a mic on. I was like, you can always...
I've not run into you as well, have I?
Sorry. It's a great question. So I, like many people, was doing content design before there was a name for it. So I find that many people, who might work in comms or copy have content design skills. So I think being able to frame it in that way so you can build a portfolio, even just with examples of where you've taken a really challenging problem, you've understood the users, you've worked through different content choices, is one. There are also some really good content design training courses. I can share them, maybe they can be shared around, but Rachel McConnell has one that's really reasonably priced, which is really good too. I would recommend going to some of the meetups, like Content Design London meetup. There's one in the Southwest too, so I would really recommend that. And also checking out some of the more entry-level content design roles. So we are starting to see now companies like Wise I think Gov do some, but kind of a more entry-level content design role, which doesn't require so much experience from people. Yeah, so a bit of education, a bit of networking, and also, yeah, just looking out at some of the companies that are, yeah, hiring for people who, yeah, they're not requiring quite as much experience, but remembering that you can be a content designer without it being your title, too, is something I found quite a lot.
We're going to leave it there if that's okay. We're out of time, but please give it up for Candi Williams.